All right, welcome back. See what we have going on here for audio levels real quick. My mouse is going to cooperate. So last time we completed assembly. I didn't tune it, I didn't do any fine tuning on it or anything, and so today we're going to talk about some fine tuning, some things you can do that should hopefully make it sound a little bit better and make it work a little bit better. One thing that I noticed that as I cranked this, it sounded almost like it was being plucked or something partway through, where it was and what that actually ended up being was the flywheel was out of round. And off camera I did a lot of work tuning this flywheel, and it's still not where I want it, but it's very, very close. And I'm actually going to take this and show you a little bit about what I did. When I started, I actually took a piece of sandpaper and I wrapped it around a dowel, because a dowel, you know, in this case this oak dowel is very straight and I could hold it real tight, and I lined it up along the edge, use this side here, and held it straight and held it in place and turned the crank, and it started sanding down the wheel. But I found out that that wasn't all that effective. I would have been spending hours and hours and hours, and honestly I spent hours doing this, but I didn't want to spend like 10 hours just with a piece of sandpaper cranking it. And what it is this flywheel is just ever so slightly out of round. It had some high spots, it had some low spots, and right now it still has a low spot, but I've gotten it down to maybe a 64th to 128th of an inch. And ultimately what I figured out was this jig that you see here. So I took a freshly sharpened chisel, lined it up 90 degrees to the edge of the flywheel, clamped it in place so I knew it was going to stay in place, and started turning the crank. And I mean, I just have this chisel just kissing the wheel, to where I get just the tiniest, I don't even know if it'll show up on camera, tiniest amount of sawdust on there where I'm scraping it. And that's working pretty well. You know, I had talked to a friend of mine about this, and he's like, well, do you have a lathe? And I'm like, well, yeah. He's like, well, that's perfect. It is and it isn't. The thing about a lathe is I could take this all apart. I could, you know, get a chuck for the lathe, which I don't have, chuck these flywheels up in the lathe, and then turn them perfectly round. Absolutely perfectly round. Thing is nothing here is really precision. You know, this is all just friction fit in place. Nothing's glued, nothing's rigid. And I don't need it just perfectly round on the flywheel itself. I need it perfectly round to the instrument. Hence why I'm doing it in place. And what I've been doing is I'll tighten this up, you know, I'll put the chisel point where it's just barely touching a high spot on the wheel, and then I turn it by hand. Let me get this past the point so you can see a little bit better. like so. And I just gently, with very little pressure, turn the flywheel against the tip of the chisel until I really don't have to put much force at all to turn it. And then I'll take the crank. Let me see if I can get this angled up a bit more. I'm going to be working on the edge of the bench more. So forgive the camera shake here. And I just sit here and crank it. And it's actually generating some super fine sawdust on the tip of that chisel. Now to do this, you need a good sharp chisel. Now Paul Sellers has some great videos on sharpening a chisel, but essentially what you need is something perfectly flat. You could use a sharpening stone, you could do sandpaper. I usually will do glass, but in this case I have some really solid flat particle board, LDF, whatever you want to call it. And I've got another chisel here, and this is, I don't even know how wide. It looks like it's about a 3/4 inch chisel. Yeah, it's a 3/4 inch chisel. And I keep my chisels pretty sharp to begin with, but all you do is you find your angle with some 1200 grit sandpaper, maybe some 600, maybe some 2000, depending upon how sharp you want to get it and how polished you want that tip. You put some moderate pressure and you just drag the chisel. Notice I'm not adjusting the chisel angle as I'm going. You can use a guide if you really want to, and when I do my initial sharpening, I do use a guide. But on these just touch-up sharpenings, I just use my hands. And I can feel this is already very sharp. Now when you do this, you're actually going to be turning a little bit of a burr on the back side of the chisel. And a lot of people will wet their sandpaper too. I do if I'm doing a lot, but these don't require very much. And what you do to get rid of that burr is you hold the chisel flat, absolutely flat, and you just go sideways like that. And that'll take that burr off. You pull it back like this, you're just going to turn that burr up to the other side, and you're just going to be chasing it back and forth. So I'm feeling that. That's pretty sharp. You know, do a couple more strokes just to make sure, and you'll actually see on here. Yeah, I'm used to the other camera position. How sharp this gets, because it'll just start reflecting light like crazy. This chisel's ready to go. Of course, I have my Irwin Marple's chisel there. It's been sharpened already. And I've been using it. It could probably use a resharpening, but I think it's okay as is. And what I do is once I get it where I'm not really getting any appreciable sawdust by just cranking, I'd say that's good. I'll take this wooden mallet, the one that came with the kit, as a matter of fact, and with the back of the mallet, just give it a whack. Now this is clamped firmly, but you can see I can't turn this wheel freely anymore. it's actually chewed into the edge of the wheel. You want to make sure you do this at a high spot. And I just gently, with both hands, work my way around the wheel a couple times. And it works more or less like a lathe, and you'll see when you get to a low spot, because what'll happen, see if I can show you, this is usually a low spot right around here somewhere. You know, I've really got to guide this thing through, and then it just becomes super easy. There's a low spot. And this, yeah. I'm getting so close that it's not falling on its own. And when you have a super low spot, it will just rotate on its own through the weight of the handle. I can probably I'm not putting a lot of pressure on this crank handle. I'm just guiding it a bit, giving it a little pressure, seeing how close I am. But I still have a high spot here. And honestly, most of this flywheel right now is a high spot. And you know, I'll go around a few times. And I mean, all this is doing is it's working as a lathe in place. And occasionally I'll have to check and, you know, give the chisel a little whack on one side or the other where I keep it perpendicular, because if it's not straight, it's going to start carving off one side of the flywheel more than the other. And from what I can tell, you want this flat and level all the way around. And then we'll sand off the edges a little so it doesn't cut grooves into these nylon strings. And then I found a little trick that roughs up the wheel a little, because since I am using a perfectly sharpened, smooth chisel, it makes this wheel very smooth. But you can see just these few times I've gone around, there's quite a bit of sawdust there on that chisel. Now there's just a little piece there. There. So we'll just go around till it's smooth. This will probably be the last of it. You know, I spent probably 2-3 hours doing this, because it started off as, gosh, almost 1/8 of an inch of a low spot. And once we get this down relatively flat, it's caused a problem. It makes our flywheel really friggin' smooth. And, well, I typically like smooth surfaces on wood. You can hear the chatter of the chisel. Well, I typically like smooth surfaces on wood. In this case, we actually need some friction so that it will vibrate the string. Yeah, this will definitely be my last round of smoothing on this. chatter is not great, but it'll smooth itself out when it loosens up, and I can just turn the crank, because the crank will actually just enact a very, very fine scraping action. You can see when you see and feel when you hit a high spot. High spot's actually a lot easier to account for than a low spot, because when you have a high spot, you can sand or just scrape that one spot until it's no longer high. A low spot, you have to sand or scrape everything else. Yeah, and it's starting to go. But if I can get it in camera, no. Can we get it? Yeah, you can see all that sawdust there. Let's see, now I can do half turns on the crank, and then after a minute or so, I can do just a full crank. And this is when it's doing that smoothing action. And it's still scraping off a little sawdust. Now if I can get the thing out of the way. Yeah, you can see. Still, it's scraping off just the tiniest amount. And then we'll push it in a little to the chisel as we rotate it and make it even smoother. Now, one trick I use on this is I'll actually take a mechanical pencil and very lightly all the way around just do some hash marks. It's a good sanding trick in general, sanding and scraping. Not putting any real pressure on here, just some light marks. You can see I'm holding the pencil at an angle. That prevents me from pushing down into the wood, because even a pencil will mar the wood. Definitely don't want to use a pen. If you use like a Sharpie or something, it will soak into the wood. And we want something that's just on the surface of the wood so that we can see when the marks actually get scraped off. And I don't know if it'll be picked up on camera or not. There's, yeah, you can kind of see it. There's little marks perpendicular to the wheel. And you can actually see that they're not really getting scraped off. But what'll happen is, if I tap this again, that blade will go in just a hair, and it'll start scraping a little bit more. Of course, that tap might not have done anything. And it's a good way to tell where your high spots are and your low spots are. As I can actually see on some parts of this, the marks are getting removed, and then on others, the marks aren't as removed. So I can see that it's not perfectly round. Now, another thing you don't want to do is rotate it the opposite direction. And the reason for that is that this is plywood. And the way plywood goes, I've got some maple here to kind of exaggerate it a bit. I don't know if you'll be able to see. I'm gonna log into the camera here and turn down the brightness. Give me just a moment. Do some image adjustment here, see what we can do. So we're going to turn brightness down a bit, see if that helps. Forgive me if it gets too dark. But you can see here, on this wood, we have some grain that's going like this. And then if I take another board, the grain on this board going like this. And plywood is basically made of a bunch of thin pieces of wood that go like this. Grain going this way, grain going this way. And they just stack, alternating back and forth, back and forth. And the cool thing about that, I'll turn my camera back up bright, is that wood is very strong. You know, in one direction, but it's not strong in the other direction. That being, this board, if I were to, you know, with the grain going this way, if I were to hit it right here, it's very, very strong. This is actually a piece of hard maple. Yeah, sorry for headphone users. But if this board had the grain going the other direction, if I hit it, it would just snap right in two. That's because this grain is something we have to watch. And basically, wood is made up of a bunch of fibers. And you think about it, the tree was growing from here up, and it's using this to grab moisture out of the dirt, carry it up little capillaries, little basically veins, through the trunk and then out to the branches and all around. And so it's basically made of tons and tons and tons of tiny little straws. So if you took, you know, a bunch of straws in your hand and set something on top with the straws going up, it would actually support that weight quite decently. But if you turned it the other way and put something on it, that pile of straws would basically smush and flatten out and want to divide and all that. You know, likewise, if I took a chisel into the side of the board, it's going to be really hard to cut because you're cutting the side of that straw. But if I put it into the end of the board, it's going to split super easy. And that's because you're cutting in between those straws. So there's a whole art to following wood grain. Got some rosin on this board, just gently scraping that off. And since plywood is made up of several layers of wood, it has end grain going in each direction. Well, end grain, if I'm splitting a board into the end grain, like so, real easy. If I'm cutting across the end grain, it's actually really hard and it dulls the chisel really quick. And essentially what I'm doing here is I'm grinding, or I am scraping end grain all the way around the wheel, because I have end grain going this way and end grain going this way. And then as it rotates, I just go from varying degrees of end grain. You know, if I'm going here, I have half end grain one way, half end grain the other. If I'm going this way, full end grain. This way, full end grain. And just like a straw, what that's doing, you know, assume that this white portion of pen tube is the end grain, and I have a knife that comes up and cuts here. It's going to try to shear it. When it shears it, it'll also bend that wood and kind of burnish it across. And that makes it super smooth. That's actually part of what you do with a card scraper. Or a cabinet scraper, as some people call them. It makes it really smooth, really pretty. But we're looking to put this rosin on the wheel to give it a little bit of friction. And if I go and turn the wheel the other way, all that's going to do is take all that burnishing I just did, where this is bent like this, and it's going to scrape it and break it this way. And then back and forth, you know, if I start alternating directions. And what's going to happen is the bulk of the wheel is going to be cut up here, but some of the grains of the wood are going to be, or fibers of the wood is going to be cut down here, and you're going to end up with a little stipple pattern, which isn't so bad considering we want some friction here, but we don't want weak wood either, and that will definitely weaken the wood. Now I just took this off, and you can actually see I've got a piece of scrap wood here that was underneath the chisel just to keep it flat. If you want to learn some more about using a lathe for woodworking, Frank Howarth, Howarth, on YouTube has some really good lathe videos. He turns really cool stuff. He turned a Death Star, he turned an eyeball, he's turned a number of bowls, number of ornaments, a whole bunch of stuff. And it's 79 out here, which is cooler than what we've been running into, but still a little warm. So we've got this. You'll notice I also had the string up above where it was disengaged from the wheel. So if I turn this down, it says you want the string about even with the wheel. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sound. And that's where the rosin comes in. And I found that with the rosin, it's really hard. And I thought it, you know, might not have been right. Did a little bit of research online. No, rosin is supposed to be hard. And you just put a light pressure on it and hold it up against the wheel. You're not pushing it into the wheel, you're holding it against the wheel. You just start turning the wheel, and it basically impregnates the wheel with rosin. And you can see it's starting to stick on it. And that's where it's getting the rosin. See if that works. If that doesn't work, what I have to do is actually sand the wheel. Try it a little bit more. If that doesn't work, I'll actually sand the wheel and apply some rosin. I can tell already that this wheel is a lot smoother than it used to be. I can also see that the rosin is actually getting worn from the friction of the wheel. So we'll turn this down. Yeah, I'm not really happy with that. So let's grab the dowel, grab a piece of sandpaper. I'm actually going to use the 240 grit that came with the kit. And see if I can show you what I'm doing here. I'm just going to hold it straight and flat. Make sure that the dowel doesn't interfere. And all this is going to do is rough up the surface of the wheel a little. So that it'll grab that rosin a bit. And I bet you it'll... Yeah, it's already sounding better. Take the string off. Yeah, it's really grabbing the rosin. I'm just resting this on the wheel. And it's just grabbing it. There's that. I'm gonna flip this one down, see if it's lining up. Okay. Flip this back up. And now I've got my phone out. Don't know if it'll show up on the camera or not. But I'm just gonna use a tuner app. G-strings is what I've typically used. We want to tune the melody string, which is the one that goes across the top dead center, the TDC of the flywheel, to D. So I'm at D4, a little high. A little low. Way too high. Turn that off so that we get a clean audio signal. To 95.8 hertz. There we go. I have a message on Twitch. Someone's wanting to know what day our 7 Days to Die server's on. Let me look that up. You don't play 7 Days to Die, you should. Good game. And a lot of fun. So there's that. Switch back to OBS. Yeah, I don't like that note. And then it says to tune this other string to ear. Doesn't really matter what it is. Another thing I wanted to try, now that it's quote-unquote tuned, is they said if you wrap some cotton around the strings, that it might actually sound a little bit better, and that the strings might last a little longer. So they didn't really cover that. And those QR codes in the manual took you to the product page, but not an actual tuning page. Manufacturer does have some tuning instructions, but you have to basically Google it. Let's see what we can do here to wrap this string in just a tiny, tiny bit of cotton. I'd say that sounds a little bit better. Let's take the other little scrap of cotton, put it around the other string. Let's rosin this a little bit more. And retune it just to make sure. Because that cotton did actually affect the tuning. It says it's C sharp 4 and a little high. finding that the more that I work this, easier it is to turn, the smoother it operates. There's that string. Let's turn on the other one. I'd say that's a success. Not exactly the sweetest sounding instrument in the world, but for 70 bucks, a little Hurdy Gurdy is pretty nice. I don't know about you. I'm happy. So we can turn the app off, so we can stop draining my battery. And now all we have to do some cleanup. I noticed that when I put the cotton on, a lot of the little rattles and stuff that I heard from the edges of the flywheel kind of went away. Another thing I kind of want to do is just touch. Just sand that edge so it's not razor sharp. It doesn't cut into the cotton and the strings. Take a bench brush. Make sure all the sawdust is off. Everything's nice and clean. And we have a functional, well, if I can find a good angle, that's better, Hurdy Gurdy. Things I've noticed on this, it is all very precision cut, but it's also friction fit. So if you're rough with this and drop it, things are going to move. Things might break. Things might pop out of place. Another thing is with these keys, I can hold, let me flip this up. You know, my bass note, no keys pressed. I press one key. But if I press another key at the same time, it sounds really awful. Switch to one note, it goes back to normal. You got to be mindful of what keys you're hitting. One key at a time. Trying to hit more than one, yeah, you're going to get a sour note. The only other things that I would probably do with this is I'm going to take some 320 grit on a little sanding nub, finger, whatever you want to call it, and just gently go around some of the edges. These are detail sanders. They're like 17 bucks on Amazon or something. But they're not bad. You can see I'm not really sanding hard with these. The only thing I'm trying to do here is take down some of these sharper edges. Anywhere where a hand's gonna go, really. I'm using sandpaper instead of a knife simply because the sandpaper is a lot more controlled. I'll do the bottom. I'm using the flat surface simply because I want it to be straight and flat. And this is just to take the sharp edges off. And I can actually see where I've been setting this down. It's picked up some wax and stuff on the bottom. That I'll actually take a chisel and just scrape that off. You'll notice I'm not going with the chisel going into the wood. I'm going back from the wood. Might be better to show on the other camera, since I actually have to hold this up where I can see it. I could use a razor blade or something, or I could sand it, but that would take the fun out of it. Once I have the majority of it off, I'll just lightly sand it. Since these are surfaces that this thing's going to rest on. Prop it up on a knee. Still works. So now I'll set this aside and begin the cleanup. As always, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed watching me do this. I plan on getting these videos over to YouTube post haste. And I've got a workshop to clean up because it's full of a bunch of scrap pieces from the build of this kit. And yes, I do typically keep the spares and some supplies around just in case something happens. I am well prepared to repair the unit. And with this being out of 1/4-inch plywood, it is very possible that come a couple months from now, I'm going to be playing this thing and it's just going to spring apart in my hands, which would not be fun. I'm going to take all of these spare parts and put them back in the box like a giant jigsaw puzzle, along with the instructions and anything else I can find that might be helpful, such as the rosin, which is already in here, and the wax. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.